Mr. Costello sat in his usual booth. The corner booth. From here, he saw everything. The door, the bar, every table in the main dining room of Trattoria Valleana. His restaurant. His world. The red leather of the seat was worn smooth by years of his presence. It was a throne disguised as furniture. Outside, the city hummed with a life he orchestrated but rarely touched. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of garlic, oregano, and respect. A respect so heavy it was almost a fragrance in itself. His two men, Franco and Sal, stood like statues near the entrance. They were not there for decoration. They were there as a statement. A full stop at the end of a very dangerous sentence. Costello swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Ice clinked softly. It was the only sound at his table. He was not eating. He was observing. Watching the quiet dance of his patrons, the practiced efficiency of his staff. All of it moved to a rhythm he had set long ago. He was a man carved from old stone and hard memories. His suit was dark, expensive, and immaculate, a stark contrast to the rough history written in the lines around his eyes. He was 60 years old, but his gaze was timeless, carrying the weight of 100 years of secrets. Then, the rhythm broke. The heavy oak door opened, letting in a sliver of the cold night and a gust of unwelcome reality. A young woman stood there. She did not belong. Her coat was thin, her hair damp from the mist. Her face was pale, etched with a weariness that went deeper than simple fatigue. It was the exhaustion of the soul. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes wide as she took in the quiet opulence of the room. The soft lighting, the white tablecloths, the hushed conversations of the city's elite. She looked like a ghost who had wandered into the wrong haunting. Franco took a step forward, his hand moving instinctively toward the inside of his jacket. Sal shifted his weight, a silent question in his eyes. They looked to Costello. The woman's eyes scanned the room, desperate, searching. They landed on Costello's booth. It was not a guess. She knew who he was. Everyone knew. Or they knew of him. The man in the corner booth. The man who owned the night. She started walking toward him. A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through the room. Waiters paused mid-stride. Diners lowered their forks. A silence fell, thick and sudden. This was not done. No one approached Mr. Costello uninvited. Franco moved to intercept her, his expression a mask of cold professionalism. This is a private table. She flinched but did not stop. Her gaze remained fixed on Costello. I need to speak with him, she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried across the silent room. Please. Franco put a firm hand on her arm. Stop. The word was not loud. It was quiet. It was gravel. It was a command that vibrated through the very floorboards. It came from Costello. He had not moved, had not even looked up from his glass. But he had spoken. Franco froze. His hand dropped from the woman's arm as if it had been burned. He stepped back, melting into the shadows. Costello finally raised his head. He looked at the woman. He saw the frayed cuffs of her coat, the cheap, worn-out shoes peeking from beneath her jeans. He saw the raw hope and sheer terror warring in her eyes. She stood before his table, trembling slightly. She clutched a worn handbag to her chest like a shield. What do you want? He asked. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. She swallowed hard. Mr. Costello, she began, her voice shaking. My name is Lena. I need a job. I'll do anything. I wash dishes, I clean floors, I can cook a little. I'm a hard worker. I swear I am. He said nothing. He just watched her. Let the silence stretch. He had heard 1,000 stories like hers. 1,000 pleas. They were usually a prelude to a request for money. But she did not ask for money. I heard you. Help people, she stammered, twisting the strap of her bag. I don't want a handout. I want to work. My car broke down. I've been walking to my job. It's 9 miles. 9 miles. The number hung in the air. Costello's expression did not change. But something inside him, a deep and dormant thing, stirred. He raised a single, long finger, a silent gesture. A signal. He was breaking his own protocol. He was listening. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will not only change Lena's life forever, but it will unravel the code of a man who thought he had left his own humanity behind long, long ago. If you are enjoying this story, and want to see how a simple act of desperation can ignite a fire of justice, please take a moment to like this video and hit that subscribe button. We love knowing where our stories travel, so please let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support allows us to keep telling stories that matter. Now, let's get back to the story. Costello gestured to the empty seat opposite him. Sit. Lena hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward Franco and Sal. They remained perfectly still, their faces unreadable. She slid into the booth, perching on the edge of the plush leather as if she might be ejected at any moment. She placed her worn handbag on her lap, her knuckles white. He watched her for a long moment. He saw the faint tremor in her hands. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the kind that came from sleepless nights filled with worry, not from late nights filled with celebration. This was not a woman looking for an easy way out. This was a woman who had run out of road. 9 miles, he repeated, his voice still low and even. Where do you work? A diner, she said. On the east side. The Night Owl. My shift ends at 2 in the morning. He did a quick calculation in his head. The east side to anywhere a person could afford to live on a waitress's salary was a long, dark walk. Through the worst parts of the city. You walk that in the middle of the night. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the tabletop. I have to. The bus stops running at midnight. A taxi. I can't afford that. Why me? He asked. The question was direct. Pointed. There are other restaurants. Other jobs. Lena finally met his eyes. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a sliver of steel. A mother's steel. Because they just see a waitress. They offer a wage. I heard you see. The whole story. And you're the only one who can fix it. Costello's world was built on a foundation of carefully constructed rules. Rules that kept him safe, that kept his organization running like a well-oiled machine. Rule number 1, no attachments. Rule number 2, business is business, emotion is a liability. Rule number 3, never get involved in the messy lives of civilians. It was a code that had served him well. It had made him powerful. It had made him feared. He was not a good man. He knew that. He had made peace with it decades ago. He was a necessary man. He maintained a certain order in a world that thrived on chaos. He dealt with problems the law couldn't or wouldn't touch. His justice was swift, final, and always out of sight. He remembered a time before the tailored suits and the expensive whiskey. A time of hunger. He grew up in a part of the city that had been forgotten by sunlight. His father was a ghost, gone before he was old enough to form a memory. His mother, Elena, was the sun and the moon of his small world. She worked 2 jobs, her hands always raw, her face perpetually tired. But she never broke. Not in front of him. He remembered her walking. Walking everywhere. In the biting winter wind, in the suffocating summer heat. Her shoes always had holes, patched with cardboard she salvaged from the market. He remembered walking beside her, his small hand lost in hers, trying to match her long, determined strides. He remembered the shame of it, the cold that seeped through his own thin soles. His mother had a saying. Dignity, Antonio, she would tell him, her voice firm. We may have nothing, but we have our dignity. You walk with your head up. He had learned the world's lessons the hard way. He learned that dignity didn't fill an empty stomach. He learned that respect wasn't given, it was taken. He took it. He built an empire on the lessons of the street, but he never forgot the feel of that cold pavement beneath his feet. He never forgot the look in his mother's eyes. This woman, Lena, had those same eyes. "You have children?" he asked. It was not a question. It was a confirmation. Her face softened instantly, the hard lines of worry melting away for a fraction of a second. A son. Leo. His 6-inch. There it was. The reason for the 9-mile walk. The reason for the terror and the steel. It was never about them. It was always about the children. "Tell me the whole story," Costello said. It was not a request. And so she did. The story tumbled out of her, a torrent of quiet desperation. Her ex-husband, Rick. A good man, once, before the gambling took hold. He lost his job, then their savings. Then he started borrowing. From the wrong people. "He took the money I had saved for the car repairs," she said, her voice cracking. "Every last dollar. For one last bet. He was going to win it all back," he said. She gave a short, bitter laugh. "He never does." The people he owed money to had started calling her. Leaving notes on her door. They knew about Leo. They had mentioned his school. Costello's hands, which had been resting on the table, tightened into fists. This was a violation of another, more sacred code. The unwritten law of his world. You don't involve families. You never, ever, touch the children. It was a line that, once crossed, invited a terrible retribution. Who is the man he owes? Costello's voice was different now. The flatness was gone. In its place was something colder. Harder. "I don't know his name," she whispered, shrinking back a little from the sudden intensity in his eyes. "Rick just called him Silas." Silas. Costello knew the name. A loan shark. A bottom feeder who operated with no honor, no code. A man who preyed on the weakest, using fear and brutality as his only tools. Silas was a cancer in the city's underbelly, a problem Costello hadn't yet gotten around to excising. He looked at Lena. He saw her pride, her fierce determination to stand on her own 2 feet despite the world trying to kick them out from under her. He saw his mother, walking through the snow, her head held high. The decision was not made in his head. It was made in a place much older, a place of memory and instinct. The rules could be bent. For this, he was going to get involved. The internal conflict was a brief, silent storm. His life was a fortress, built to keep the world out. Helping this woman meant opening a door. It meant inviting complication, emotion. It was a risk. His entire organization was built on the perception of him as an untouchable, unfeeling force of nature. An act of charity, of compassion, could be seen as weakness. His enemies were always watching, waiting for a crack in the armor. He thought of his mother, wasting away from an illness they couldn't afford to treat properly. He had been a boy then, powerless. He had sworn on her grave that he would never be powerless again. What was the point of all this power, all this fear he commanded, if he could not use it to correct a simple, profound injustice? What was the point of owning the city if he let a woman and her child be terrorized within it? The storm passed. The decision settled, hard and clear. He looked at Lena, whose story had finally run out. She sat there, exposed and vulnerable, awaiting his judgment. "The kitchen here needs a new bookkeeper," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "The hours are 9 to 5. The pay is double what you make at the diner. It's in the West Market building. Is that closer to your home?" Lena stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. Disbelief and hope flickered across her face. "West Market? That's only 6 blocks from my apartment." "Good," he said, as if settling a minor logistical issue. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick money clip. He peeled off a stack of crisp $100 bills, folded them in half, and pushed them across the table. This is an advance on your first month's salary. Get your car fixed. Buy groceries. Get a new coat. She stared at the money as if it were a venomous snake. I can't take that. It is not a gift, he said firmly. It is an advance. You will work it off. You start Monday. My man Marco will call you with the details. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't try to stop them. They traced silent paths down her pale cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he said, his voice softer than he intended. Just be a good mother to your boy. He gave a slight nod to Sal, who appeared at the table as if summoned by telepathy. Sal will drive you home. Lena stood up, clutching the money in her hand. She looked at him one last time, an expression of profound, bewildered gratitude on her face. Then she turned and let Sal escort her out of the restaurant. The room slowly returned to its normal hum. The moment had passed. The anomaly had been resolved. But for Costello, it had just begun. He sat in the silence, the echo of her desperation still hanging in the air. He turned his gaze to Marco, his loyal lieutenant, who had been watching the entire exchange from the bar. Marco approached the table, his face a careful blank. He had been with Costello for 20 years. He knew how to read the silences. Marco, Costello said, his voice once again a low, dangerous rumble. Boss? Find this Rick. The ex-husband. Find out everything. Where he is, what he does, and exactly how much he owes Silas. Marco nodded. And Silas? Costello picked up his glass and drained the last of the amber liquid. He set the glass down with a soft, definitive click. Silas, he said, a cold fire igniting in his eyes, has made a business error. I am going to arrange a meeting to discuss the terms of his retirement. The gears of his vast, unseen machine began to turn. Phone calls were made in hushed tones. Men in dark cars began to move through the city's sleeping streets. The power that Costello had so carefully cultivated was being mobilized. Not for profit, not for territory, but for a waitress who walked 9 miles in worn-out shoes, and for the memory of a woman who had taught him everything about dignity. Marco was efficient. He was always efficient. Within 2 hours, he was back, standing beside Costello's booth. The restaurant was empty now, save for the cleaning crew working in quiet deference to the man in the corner. The ex-husband's name is Rick Miller, Marco reported, his voice low. Small-time gambler. All talk. Owe Silas $12,000. Silas added his own interest. He's telling Miller the number is 25. Costello grunted. Classic Silas. Predatory. Miller is terrified, Marco continued. He's been hiding out. Silas couldn't find him, so he went after the woman. Figured it was the quickest way to get Miller to surface. Where is Miller now? Silas found him an hour ago. He's holding him at his warehouse down by the docks. The one they use for persuasion. Costello nodded slowly. It was all falling into place. A simple, ugly story. And Silas? He's there. With his top 3 guys. They think they're untouchable down there. Costello looked at his watch. It was almost 3 in the morning. The city was quiet. The perfect time for loud business. Get Franco and Sal, he said, pushing himself out of the booth. We're going to pay a visit. I want to have a word with Silas. And I want to look this Rick Miller in the eye. The plan was not complicated. It was Costello himself. His presence was the plan. In his world, a personal visit from him was not a social call. It was a verdict. They drove in a single, black sedan, silent and sleek like a shark cutting through dark water. Costello sat in the back, watching the desolate industrial street slide by. He felt a cold calm settle over him. This was his element. The quiet before the storm. He was not a man of explosive violence. He was a man of precise, overwhelming force. He did not start fires. He extinguished them. Permanently. The warehouse was a hulking brick box at the end of a deserted pier. A single, bare bulb cast a sickly yellow glow over a rusted steel door. Two of Silas's men stood outside, trying to look tough, smoking cigarettes to ward off the damp chill rolling in off the water. They saw the sedan approach and straightened up, their hands twitching. They recognized the car. Everyone did. Their bravado evaporated into the night air. The sedan stopped. Franco and Sal got out first, their movements fluid and economical. They did not draw weapons. They didn't need to. Their reputation was weapon enough. Costello emerged from the car, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. He walked toward the door, his footsteps the only sound in the dead-end street. One of the guards, a young man trying to grow a mustache, found his voice. "Mr. Costello. This is private property. Silas isn't expecting you." Costello didn't break stride. He looked at the young man, his eyes flat and cold. "Tell Silas he has two choices. He can open the door, or I can have my men remove it. And him." The young man swallowed hard and scurried inside. A moment later, the heavy door groaned open. Silas stood there. He was a big man, fleshy and soft, who tried to project an image of power through cheap jewelry and a loud voice. Tonight, his face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and forced arrogance. "Costello," he blustered. "To what do I owe the pleasure? It's a little late for a chat." Costello walked past him into the cavernous space of the warehouse. The air smelled of rust, stagnant water, and fear. In the center of the room, under a harsh spotlight, a man was tied to a chair. He was bruised and bleeding from a split lip. Rick Miller. He looked up as Costello entered, his eyes pleading. "We need to talk about your business practices, Silas," Costello said, his voice calm, but it cut through the silence of the warehouse like a shard of glass. He circled the chair, looking down at the pathetic figure of Rick Miller. "You've been harassing a woman. A mother. Her name is Lena." Silas scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "That's between me and him. He owes me money. His family is collateral. That's how it works." Costello stopped and turned to face Silas. "No," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That is not how it works. Not in my city. In my city, families are off limits. Children are sacred. You seem to have forgotten the rules." He gestured to Marco, who stepped forward and placed a briefcase on a nearby crate. He opened it. It was filled with stacks of cash. The debt was 12,000, Costello stated. "That is what you are owed. Here is 25,000. That covers the original amount and closes the account of this worthless creature." He gestured dismissively at Rick. "The rest is a fee. For my time. And for the lesson you are about to learn." Silas stared at the money, his greed warring with his fear. "What lesson?" "The lesson," Costello said, stepping closer, his voice now laced with a chilling intensity, "is about a woman who walks 9 miles to work every night. 9 miles through the dark, because this piece of garbage took the money she saved for her car. She does that to feed her son. A 6-year-old boy named Leo. A boy whose school you threatened." Costello's eyes bored into Silas. "You didn't just try to collect a debt, Silas. You tried to break a woman's spirit. You tried to poison a child's world with your filth. And in doing so, you have forfeited your right to operate here." Silas's face went white. "Now, wait a minute, Costello. You can't just—" "I can," Costello interrupted, his voice like the closing of a tomb door. "And I am. Your business in this city is over. Tonight. You will pack your bags, you will take what you can carry, and you will be gone by sunrise. If I ever hear your name spoken in this city again, I will not be so generous." Silas's men shifted nervously, but they made no move. They knew they were outmatched. This wasn't a fight. It was a changing of the guard. Costello turned his attention back to Rick Miller. He walked over and stood in front of him. He looked down at the man, his expression one of pure contempt. "You," he said softly. "You are a ghost. You will disappear from their lives. You will never contact Lena again. You will never see your son again. She is building a good life for that boy, a life you tried to ruin. You will not be a part of it. Do you understand me?" Rick nodded frantically, tears and blood mingling on his face. Yes, I understand." Good. Costello turned to Marco. "Cut him loose. Give him $1,000 from the case and put him on the first bus heading west. If he ever comes back, the problem becomes permanent." Marco nodded and moved to cut Rick's bonds. Costello walked back to Silas, who stood frozen, his empire crumbling around him. "The account is closed," Costello said. "Everything in this warehouse, all your paper, all your records of debt. It all belongs to me now." Franco and Sal began to move through the warehouse, collecting ledgers and files with practiced ease. They were not just shutting Silas down, they were erasing him. The threat was neutralized. The problem was solved. Permanently. Silas would not be bothering anyone ever again. Neither would Rick. Costello had drawn a line in the sand, a circle of protection around a woman and her son, and he had dealt with those who dared to cross it with the finality of a predator. A few days later, Lena walked into the office of the West Market Food Distribution Company. It was one of Costello's many legitimate businesses, a clean, well-lit place that smelled of cardboard and fresh produce. She wore a new coat. Her steps were lighter, her face free from the deep-set exhaustion that had been her constant companion. Her new job was simple. She checked invoices and filed receipts. The work was steady, the pay was good. For the first time in years, she could breathe. Costello had arranged to be there, under the pretense of reviewing the quarterly reports. He sat in the manager's office, watching her through the glass. He saw her chat with a coworker, a small, genuine smile on her face. It was a good sight. He called her in. She entered the office, her expression a mixture of respect and nervousness. Her son, Leo, stood beside her, clutching her hand. He was a small, bright-eyed boy with a curious gaze. "Mr. Costello," she said. "Thank you. For everything. I started paying back the advance from my first paycheck." She held out an envelope. He waved it away. "Keep it. The debt is paid." She looked confused. "But I haven't done anything." "You reminded an old man of something important," he said, his voice gruff. He was not comfortable with this part. "The gratitude. The emotion. That is worth more than money." He looked down at the boy, who was staring up at him with wide, inquisitive eyes. The boy had been quiet the whole time, just watching, listening. "I won't hear from Rick again, will I?" Lena asked softly. "Or the other man?" "No," Costello said, his gaze unwavering. "You will not. That chapter of your life is closed." The finality in his tone was absolute. She nodded, a single tear of relief rolling down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. Then, the boy let go of his mother's hand and took a small step forward. He looked directly at Costello, his small face serious. "Are you a good guy?" Leo asked. The question was pure, simple, and utterly disarming. It was a question no one had dared to ask Antonio Costello in 30 years. The question hung in the air of the sterile office. Marco, standing by the door, held his breath. Costello looked down at the small boy. He saw the unfiltered innocence in his eyes, the genuine curiosity. In that moment, he was not a feared crime boss, not a man of violence and secrets. He was just a man being judged by a child. A slow, unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. He crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's level. The expensive fabric of his suit creased. "Sometimes," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "the world doesn't let you be just one thing. But tonight, I got to be what your mother needed," he corrected himself. "I am what your mother needed me to be." Leo seemed to consider this profound statement with the gravity only a child could muster. He then broke into a wide, gaped grin and held out a piece of paper he had been clutching. It was a drawing, done in bright, waxy crayon. It depicted 3 stick figures. A tall man in a dark suit, a woman with a smiling face, and a small boy holding both their hands. Costello took the drawing. He looked at it for a long moment. He stood up, the drawing held carefully in his large hand. He looked at Lena. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It was blank except for a single phone number engraved in the center. "If you or your son ever need anything," he said, handing it to her. "Anything at all. You call this number. Day or night." It was not just an offer of help. It was a shield. A promise of permanent, unwavering protection. Lena took the card, her hand trembling slightly. She understood its weight. She and Leo left the office. Costello stood by the window, watching them walk out of the building and into the afternoon sun, a mother and son walking freely, without fear. He looked down at the crayon drawing in his hand. A crude, colorful, and priceless thing. 10 years passed. The city changed, as cities do. Buildings rose and fell. New names came into power, old ones faded into legend. But the name Costello remained, a constant, whispered in the city's hidden corners. Antonio Costello was older now. His hair was more silver than black, the lines on his face carved deeper by time and the burdens he carried. He sat in his real office, a quiet, richly paneled room high above the city, far from the noise of his restaurants and warehouses. This was the nerve center of his empire. His desk was a vast expanse of polished mahogany, neat and orderly. On it sat papers detailing shipping manifests, financial statements for his dozens of businesses, and reports from his lieutenants. It was the architecture of a life lived in the shadows. But in the center of the desk, in a place of honor, sat a simple, elegant silver frame. Inside the frame was not a picture of a loved one or a trophy of a past victory. It was a child's crayon drawing. A stick-figure man in a dark suit, holding hands with a woman and a small boy. The colors had faded slightly over the years, but the image was still clear. Underneath, in a child's uneven scrawl, were 3 words, "Our good guy." Marco entered the office, placing a thin file on the desk. "The tuition payment for the fall semester has been processed. An anonymous scholarship, as requested." Costello nodded, not looking up from the drawing. "And the boy? How is he?" "Leo is doing well," Marco reported. "Top of his class in the engineering program. A good kid. He works hard. His mother is very proud." Lena, he knew, was now the head of his entire accounting division. She was sharp, loyal, and commanded the same respect she had once so desperately sought. She never knew the full extent of Costello's intervention that night, only that her problems had vanished. She also never knew that her son's prestigious university education was being funded by the same man. She never had to use the number on the card. That, to Costello, was the truest measure of his success. He had kept his promise. He had given them a life free from fear. He ran a thumb over the glass of the picture frame. That night, 10 years ago, had been a transaction. Silas's criminal enterprise for one woman's peace of mind. A bargain he would make again without a moment's hesitation. It was the single most profitable investment of his entire life. In a world of shadows and hard choices, a world defined by power and fear, true strength is not always found in the fist. Sometimes, it is found in the open hand. It is measured not by what you can take, but by what you choose to protect. A man like Costello lived by a code, a brutal arithmetic of survival and control. But the purest acts, the ones that echo through the years, are those that defy all logic and answer a higher call. It is the courage to stand for those who cannot stand for themselves, to be a shield in the dark. For in the end, it is not our reputation that defines us, but the quiet, unseen moments of compassion that redeem us, proving that even a man who has made a life in the darkness can create a small, enduring pocket of light.